Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you all are getting ready for Christmas.
Mm.
You've got all your shopping out of the way and food prepared and everything.
Yes.
Tonight, we're going to divert a little bit from what we've been doing. Um, we're going to talk tonight for a little while about contentment. Um, over the years, I've come to the conclusion that we've become one of the most discontent population groups in the industrial world. It appears we have lost an understanding of the difference between needs and wants. And as we approach Christmas Day, I've watched so many people harried as they're approaching this day. So many people are focused on buying things that many people are not grateful for or grateful to receive, and most likely either rewrap the gift or it'll show up in next summer's garage sale. Many more spend resources they don't have, and consequently will spend the majority of 2026 paying off the credit card. So the podcast tonight is going to focus on the principle of contentment. And I have chosen to take the perspective that comes from Jeremiah Burroughs' book, The Rare Jewel of Christian Contentment. I would encourage you to purchase this book. It's available on Amazon, as it will give you a fresh perspective on what true contentment represents. Near everything that will be discussed comes directly out of his book. So I hope each of you can glean something from this podcast. Now, I recognize not everyone listening to this podcast will agree with this presentation. The only thing I would ask is that you would consider the merits of this viewpoint.
Yes.
So we're going to begin.
Mm-hmm.
The basis of this perspective comes out of Philippians 4:11, and this is where the Apostle Paul said, "For I have learned in whatever state I am in to be content." And that's the theme of this message tonight. According to the author of this book that we're using tonight, his definition of contentment is as follows: contentment, as understood from a Christian perspective, is the inward, peaceful, and gracious state of mind. It is characterized by a free submission to God's decisions and a genuine joy found in His will for every situation. I don't believe you'll find that definition in the standard books. We're going to look a little bit tonight about the process of learning contentment, as it involves several key aspects that shape the believer's relationship with God and their experience in everyday life. I'm going to go through these, there's several of them, and then I will comment, or Alexis may have some comments on some of these also.
Mm-hmm.
Contentment is an internal experience. It is something that takes place within the soul rather than being dependent on external circumstances such as money, positions, social media, influence, one's last name, and one's standard or position in a community. Contentment brings peace to the heart. When contentment is present, it brings a calming peace that settles the heart in all situations. We find in Psalm 46 in Psalm 33 that a reflective contentment spirit is able to say, "It is well with my soul." We also find in the New Testament a verse that mentions, "Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth will speak." Now, that can refer to something negative, or it can refer to something that is joyous and obedient to the Lord. Contentment also shapes the spirit's attitude. The presence of contentment positively influences and transforms one's attitude and outlook on life. Contentment is a state of grace. It is not merely a feeling, but a gracious state that reflects God's work in the believer's life. Contentment flows from grace. Grace is that unmerited favor that God gives to each of us. It's nothing earned. It's nothing we can prove ourselves for. It's just an act of love on God's part. And it is the ability to be content comes naturally as a result of living in this state of grace. It's understanding that unmerited favor. And when you begin to understand it, it gives you a fresh perspective of contentment. Contentment also involves submitting to God and trusting Him. It requires a deliberate act of submission and trust in God's wisdom and sovereignty. It is not a self-made process. It's something that flows directly from God. Contentment finds joy in God's will. True contentment is marked by a joyful acceptance of God's will, regardless of my personal desires. We find that when our personal desires are brought forth, whether it's through something we want, many times we find that our motives are self-serving. Thereby, there is a sense of discontentment that results from that. Contentment recognizes God's control. A content heart understands and accepts that all circumstances are under God's sovereign control. Contentment remains steady in every situation, whether facing difficulties and enduring trials. Contentment equips the behavior to remain steadfast and unshaken. Those are the major aspects of the process of learning contentment. Now, I'm going to elaborate on a few of these, not all of them, but a few of them with the time we have remaining. The first one is contentment is something that happens within the soul. It's the inward submission of the heart. It originates in my mind, and from my mind, it travels down into my heart. It's a transformation of the heart. It's the silencing of those internal distractions that hinder my focus on God as I seek to hear His voice guiding me to a content heart. In the Christian faith, we refer to this as prayer. It is a time we spend before the Lord in a quiet manner before Him. It's a learned behavior, and initially there's going to be these voices in your head that seek to distract you about the day's activities, things you should be doing, priorities that you have. And in doing that many times, it distracts us from fully concentrating and putting our attention upon our focus on God. Contentment is the calmness of the heart. When we have a calmness of the heart and when we are content, we're in a state where everything is peaceful and still inside of us. It's a calm and gracious state of mind. It is not in opposition with each other, which means calm and gracious are pretty much synonymous. That's what we receive in that content state. It's a time that we can freely share what's in our heart, and we can bring those complaints to God. He already knows the complaints because he already knows what we think. But it does give us the opportunity to voice those complaints to him. It's a way to further develop and build our relationship with God, because not everything that we do, everything we go through is always that easy. And sometimes we have concerns, we may have disagreements, and this is the time that we bring it before God. Contentment shapes the spirit's attitude. When our spirit is aligned to God's spirit, it produces a proper attitude of contentment. And what I mean by that, it aligns perfectly with God's will. And there's a oneness that occurs between my spirit and the Holy Spirit. It's easy for me to say it. It's not the easiest thing to necessarily experience because it is a learned process that we go through. The next one I just want to touch base on is contentment freely submits to and finds satisfaction in God's decision. It's a willingness of my mind and my heart, it's not forced upon me, to submit to his decisions. It becomes an act of my will, and it's a willing choice I make. It takes an attitude of being ready and willing to be content. It doesn't necessarily automatically mean I am content, but it's a preparation that leads me to a contented state. Contentment, and the rest of this that I'm going to refer to is going to take time. It's not something that happens in 30 days, 6 months, or a year. It's a process, a learning process that requires considerable diligence and daily devotion to it. And it's something that we probably never will perfect on this side of heaven, but it's something that we should attain to have a desire for. So this next one is contentment is accepting and finding satisfaction in God's decisions. It accepts God's ways and thoughts, recognizing his ways and his thoughts are much higher than our ways and our thoughts. Usually what is a hindrance in this contentment is we have a tendency with our pride and our arrogancy to think we know better than God who created us. And it's one of the 7 sins that God hates, he despises. It's called a haughty spirit. And it's one that really hinders, it becomes a sin issue, in all honesty. We have to remember that God's thoughts, his plans and understandings far surpass human comprehension. It's much like the vast difference between the heavens and earth, which we really can't comprehend. It's important that in looking at this, accepting and finding satisfaction in God's decisions, that we do an honest assessment of just how much my pride and my arrogance and self-sufficiency and meism comes into reaching this point of accepting his decisions. The next aspect is contentment must be in every situation. This means accepting hardship as it comes as part of God's plan. Regardless of the duration, the length of the affection, regardless of the type of situation, one may be in knowing it is God's will and plan to bring us to this state of contentment. And I would say this is the most difficult one. It is hard to be joyous. It is hard to be content when things are going terribly wrong in our life. Whether it's a death, whether it's an illness, a breakup in a relationship, a financial catastrophe. It's one of the last things that we have to work through to establish this contentment, irrespective of the situations we're in. I don't know, Alexis, if you have anything you want to add, feel free to bring that forward.
Yeah. I really have a thing with contentment during situations where it's hard for me to understand. I've always had that sense of contentment, I feel like, in situations that I don't understand, but I also never knew why, really. And then, sitting here and listening today, I'm also learning things as well. And a lot of this contentment in my life that I'm noticing, and some of the spaces in my life where I don't have contentment that I'm noticing, aligns a lot with what I've learned today. And I know that the biggest thing that I've learned is having that relationship with God is something that He prioritizes. And it's not just, I don't know how to explain it. It's not just having these things. It's also prioritizing and being honest and having integrity with that relationship with God. And I think that is something that'll help a lot with people who are still navigating contentment and who are still learning about it. I think that's, I guess, the first steps is starting that relationship, that open ended communication with God.
Yeah, I think the points you bring up, Alexis, are very valid.
Mm-hmm.
I think as humans, we're kind of programmed to ask the why questions.
Yeah.
And I think many people refuse to admit to God that they want to know the why.
Mm-hmm.
They want to understand why circumstances have occurred in their life. Now, contentment is easy when everything's going well,
Yeah.
when we have plenty of material resources, when our homes are functioning in a godly way, when our jobs are fun and we enjoy being around the people we're around. It's not as easy to be content if you work for a boss that has a tendency not to agree with you and has a tendency to want to dominate you. It's very common in those situations. We can get resentful.
Mm-hmm.
we can get angry. And it, in doing that, we're humans,
Yeah.
and that happens.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe this is where the grace of God comes in to our daily life. Because we got to remember God's love and grace covers up a multitude of transgressions or sin.
Yes.
And He is more than willing to forgive us if we're willing to confess it to Him.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's very, very important that we bring our thoughts, our displeasures, our anger to Him. He already understands where we're at.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it deepens that relationship with Him, whether or not we ever get an answer that satisfies us. The goal is that regardless of what the conditions are, we can trust and believe that His decisions are always in our best interest.
Yeah.
And that is very, very difficult to deal with, especially when you have a sudden death in a family of a spouse or a child.
Yeah.
And it's very natural and it's very appropriate that we ask why.
Mm-hmm.
And many times we don't get an immediate answer. But what we find is over time, God brings that answer to us in a different form or in a different way than we think. And that's why it's so important to be in that daily relationship and contact with Him, because His blessings are never ending. They're not always immediate, but they're on His timetable. And if we're not attuned to Him, we many times will miss that voice that answers questions that we may have asked years and years ago. We've experienced it in our home when one of our mothers died very suddenly, and we spent years asking why. And years later, God was faithful. He didn't have to, but He was faithful in explaining the situation to us. And it made perfect sense at that point. But when you're going through it, it doesn't make sense,
Mm-hmm.
because emotionally, most of the time we're a wreck and we don't think rationally. We're not open to hearing from God in many cases. So, again, Alexis, I think that's very, very appropriate,
Mm-hmm.
and very, very real and honest. Now, as we end this podcast, it's my hope that as you enter Christmas Day, that you at least consider pursuing contentment in the coming year. And we would both like to extend to you a joyous Christmas season.
Yes.
Now, I'm going to conclude this podcast with a song from Christine DeMarco, and it's entitled It Is Well. And I find that it is very fitting, it's very appropriate for what we just discussed.
Yes.
Grand earth is quaked before, moved by the sound of His voice. The seas that are shaken and stirred my regard. And through it all, my eyes are on you. And through it all, it is well. And through it all, my eyes are on you. And it is well with me. Far be it from me to not believe, even when my eyes can't see. And this mountain that's in front of me will be thrown into the midst of the sea. And through it all, my eyes are on you. And through it all, it is well. And through it all, my eyes are on you. And it is well. It is well. So let go, my soul, and trust in Him. The waves and wind still know His name. So let go, my soul, and trust in Him. The waves and wind still know His name. So let go, my soul, and trust in Him. The waves and wind still know His name. The waves and wind still know His name. And it is well with my soul. Sing it. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well. It is well with my soul. Sing it out, it is well. Oh, it is well. It is well with my soul. Because of who you are, Lord. through it all, it is well, Lord. And through it all, my eyes are on you, and it is well with me.
Okay. I want to make note that tomorrow at 5, we're going to have our next podcast, and it's going to be a series on God's blessings. And tomorrow is going to be an overview of what God's blessings are and what that means. And then next Monday and Tuesday, we will have an ongoing discussion regarding the reasons individuals don't receive God's blessings. So I hope you would tune into our podcast tomorrow. And for you that aren't, have a joyous holiday
Yes.
night.
Good night.